Hello, and thank you for joining us. We are very excited to speak with you this afternoon about diversity inclusion. So thank you already for your interest in the topic. My name is Elizabeth Price. I'm the Director of Marketing and Operations for Blackbaud here in Canada, and I am joined by Michael Moore. Michael, you can do your own introduction if you don't mind.
Hello, everyone. I am equally excited to be here and to talk about diversity and inclusion, something that I'm passionate about. I am the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Blackbaud.
Thank you. And so why don't you, I know that it's a role that's relatively new in some cases, both in the social good space as well as more broadly in the corporate space. So can you tell us a little bit about your own history, Michael, how you came to hold the position that you do today?
Yeah, in one way or the other, I feel like I've been doing diversity and inclusion work kind of my whole career. In many instances, it was kind of on the side in corporate roles where I was trying to work to increase diversity and working on sort of the culture of the organization I was in to better embrace the diversity. But most recently, I came to Charleston about 5 or 6 years ago. I had been running a food company, and we were elated in that we sold the company, which was our goal. And I was on the board of the International African American Museum, which is a project here in Charleston, building a museum on the sort of the predominant landing spot for all of the Africans who came to America through slavery. And the champion of that project was former Mayor Riley, Joe Riley. And as I was kind of transitioning away from the company that I was leading and that was sold, he basically said, "Hey, look, I've been working on this for 15 years. It needs some real executive leadership. Can you come and give us that extra bit of concerted, dedicated executive leadership to help us raise the money, to help us hire the staff, to manage the consultants and the architects and the museum professionals and the like, to help us get this project across the finish line?" And so I did that. And as a part of that project, I met Mike Giannone, who was the CEO of Blackbaud, and developed a wonderful relationship with him. And as I announced that I was heading back to the private sector, we started some conversations that led to where I am now. So it's been great.
Well, we are very fortunate from that sequence of events and thankful that you can bring in so many valuable perspectives to the conversation. So to actually share out some of that wealth of knowledge, why don't we get started? And would you be able to just articulate your thoughts in terms of how you would define DEI that we hear so much about? Sometimes it's seen as DNI, sometimes idea principles, but just help understand what some of the messages are behind that acronym or those acronyms.
Yeah, and I'll even take a step back and share at least a high level thought about what is just what is diversity, why is it important. So,
Sure.
when I think about diversity on a practical level, diversity is about having a group of people who offer diverse ways of thinking, diverse ways of solving problems, diverse backgrounds. We all grow up with a variety of different aspects of our life, whether it's our gender sort of affiliation, our race, our ethnicity, our socioeconomic status, our sort of access to education, just all those kinds of things. They all help form a lens through which we see and therefore sort of consume the world, experience the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all this research that shows how bringing together a collection of people with these different lenses can really help to enhance productivity, innovation. McKinsey's done some wonderful research that talks about how companies that do better in terms of diversity have greater sales, have greater market value for public companies. Like I said, higher sort of innovation. So there's there's a business case. Now, there also is a moral case, if I might say, for
Mhm.
these factors as well. I mean, basically what we're talking about is creating a platform where we treat everyone equally, where we embrace everyone and we inspire them, create an environment that inspires them to do and be their best.
Mhm.
There is research that basically says that you could take a genius, you could take Albert Einstein, and you could have a group of people with quote unquote average intelligence. And if you gave the same problem to each, the group of people will always outperform the individual, even though that individual might have off the charts intelligence, because that group is going to be looking at the problem from different angles, is going to be testing each other, is going to be sort of doing things to help get to a better conclusion. And I think at the core, that's the benefit of diversity is that if you've got an organization that basically all thinks the same, sees the world through the same lens, then you're missing out on an extraordinary breadth of perspective and experience and insight that can only come from having different people. So diversity, long-winded answer, diversity, I think, is about getting a collection, a strategic collection of people in your organization that will be able to bring just this broad variety of skills, of capabilities that to help enhance performance. Now, the only way to really leverage that diversity is if you have inclusion. Inclusion is about creating a culture
Mhm.
that meets everyone where they are, that again, that sort of inspires people to do their best. Most of us have probably been in situations where we've really felt, that our contributions were wanted, were valued. And, people will bend over backwards often in those situations to do their best, to do more than what
Mhm.
is required. But we've also probably been in situations where we felt maybe not so much appreciated or even felt marginalized or maybe even felt exploited to some degree, and you're just not going to be able to get the best out of that individual. And so collectively, if you look at any organization, any family, any team, any company, any country,
Mhm.
the collective productivity of that group is only a product of the productivity of each of the individuals. And so if you've got high diversity, but you don't have inclusion, then you'll
Mhm.
have a lot of different people, but you're not really tapping into the strengths that they bring to the table, and you're leaving lots of productivity on the sidelines. You've got to have both diversity and inclusion. And I think equity, I see equity is about, providing those equal opportunities, equal access uh, to whatever it is, the opportunities. There's a saying that I believe deeply, that there is an equal distribution of talent in the world, but there's not always an equal distribution of opportunity. And so when we talk about equity and inclusion, we're talking about sort of elevating everyone so that we are extracting, all of the best of each of them.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost equity is leveling the playing field, but inclusion is recognizing that the playing field looks different to everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it. So making sure you have the diversified mix present, and then
Mhm.
obviously facilitating a mechanism to uh, maximize that experience set that you have available. I love that. And so I think you mentioned already what some of the values of having that diversified set of experiences is to a lot of companies based on the McKinsey studies, et cetera. And I think, further to that, you can see more with Gallup. I mean,
Mhm.
companies, whether in the nonprofit space, whether in the corporate space, at the end of the day, are a collection of individuals. They are living and breathing organisms, which are the employees that make up said organization. And so having a capacity to engage employees, and so inclusion being that engagement mechanism, therefore has a direct output on that productivity. So when you get into how to approach D&I as a practice, what would you say is the best place to start? So companies can look internally, they can look externally, how they show up in terms of their stance on D&I. Can you tell us a little bit about, your thoughts in that particular realm and comparing the two?
Yeah, it's a complicated question because I think each organization is different, right?
Mm,
And each organization, what we're talking about is impacting culture, and each culture is different. But what I would say is that you can't necessarily really elevate internal or external. It's like saying which is more important, your brain or your heart. You really
mm,
need both to be high performing. But that said, I think again, I used the example before. You could really focus externally to see what other companies are doing to really recruit and bring in people. But if you haven't done the work internally on your culture to figure out how to embrace the people that you're bringing in and getting the most from them, then you're going to really underperform sort of your efforts. So you've got to focus internally on, again, on your culture, and then you've got to also be looking externally to bring people into your organization who will bring that diversity that we talked about, and bring all the advantages of diversity that we talked about. Another couple of two quick things that I didn't mention in terms of
yeah,
benefits of diversity, I just want to add really quickly. One of them is, it allows organizations to better serve sort of their customers. I mean, we live in a world that, because of technology, is getting smaller and smaller every day. And
right.
so you might even be a tiny organization, but because of the internet, the breadth of your reach can be global. And unless you kind of understand who you are engaging with, then you're not going to be able to, to address their needs in a very sort of I was going to say consumer centric.
Right.
Could be any.
Audience centric, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, we all, organizations, companies, we live in communities, and there's a community uh, element to this as well. That we organizations are a part of communities, and I think diversity and inclusion, in many instances, those efforts help to engage sort of with an organization's communities in more effective kinds of ways that yield benefits to recruiting, benefits to all kinds of things.
Yeah, and that just reminds me, I mean, obviously being biased, having a sales and marketing background, to me that it's just value selling.
Mhm.
So the first thing you want to do to try and be successful is understand the challenge of whoever you are supporting. And so how can you understand that if you don't have kind
Yep.
of a holistic understanding of the situation? And there are so many elements that play into that context
Yeah.
that are important to take into account. I also like what you said in terms of the look outside of an organization for things like best practices,
Mhm.
and using really the focus of D&I as an exercise of education. And I
Mhm.
think that there's just so much, I want to call it respectful learning in that space, that, like, as part of the D&I practice, that I think lends itself to such a wealth of opportunity for companies. So along those lines, your role, as you know, is a first for Blackbaud, and in fact is a first for several companies, both in, like, as I mentioned at the beginning, in corporate and nonprofit or charity space. For a company to be successful with its D&I practice, how formalized do you think that practice, or having a leadership role with that focus, is attached to it? How formalized do you think it actually needs to be successful?
I think it needs to be as formal as any other effort that has an impact has the potential to impact your business in that kind of a way. I mean, I think it needs to be formal. I mean,
Mm,
the converse of doing it informally, it perhaps signals to the organization that maybe it's not really that important, and so we're not going to really formalize it. I mean, I think, again, we, if one believes the research that's out there, we're talking about an opportunity to increase, revenue and profitability by, like a third.
Hmm.
Everything else being equal, you'll increase your productivity, your sales, your revenue by 30% plus just by having diverse and inclusive kind of a workforce. So it's meaningful.
Right.
So to the extent that there was any other strategy that someone came to leadership and said, "Hey, I can increase, your business by, this sizable chunk," they would take that seriously and they would apply a sense of commitment and would identify some metrics to track it and would fund it and support it in appropriate kinds of ways. Yeah, I think diversity, inclusion, DE, and I think it deserves that kind of commitment.
I agree. And love what you were saying about business prioritization, and you can create a business case around it if required, but just to treat it the same way you would for any other operational element of an organization. And so, with just a couple of minutes left, what would you say for an organization that wants to implement, and start getting started on their D&I journey in the short term? What would you say are some of the things that they can do immediately?
I think the first thing is to be serious about it and to signal to the organization that you're serious about it. I think it's got to be top down, the commitment and the support, whether it's from the president, CEO, I think in conjunction with a board. I think there needs to be a resolution of sorts that, hey, this is something that is important to us and we're going to go after it. And I think you've got to tell that. You've got to, sort of communicate to the organization that this is something that's important. And then you've got to walk the walk, walk the talk, I guess. You've got to do things to indicate that. I think education is a key component of this. The world is such that it's very competitive and it can tend to divide people in instances. And so that's where, unconscious biases come into play. Not that people necessarily are even actively,
Right.
making decisions that are sort of influencing those around them in non-productive ways, but sometimes people don't even see it. So I think, education, I think training, I think those are all important. I think, going sort of back and like any other sort of serious formal business process, again, creating a set of metrics that you will track and that you will evaluate management by. I think that's important. Um, and I think, of course, dedicating resources, dedicating human resources, people, dedicating other financial and other resources to invest in this, I think, is obviously important. So again, I don't think there is well, let me back up. Diversity and inclusion efforts are really difficult because it's talking about things that are complicated, complex, difficult topics. One of the things
Mhm.
I grew up and like probably most, and there are certain things that you don't talk about work, and certainly, or don't talk about at work, and certainly race, religion, sexuality, like these are like things at the core that we don't talk about. And so I think
Yeah.
applying a set of tools that allow people to sort of safely and skillfully talk about issues, I think is important as well. I mean, I think many do a great job, particularly down here in the United States, of brushing things under the rug and then kind of hoping for the best, and that doesn't really work around issues of race and history and the like. And so I think we've got to deal with issues. So I think there's a lot of kind of blocking and tackling that an organization can do, and but I think it starts at the top with a real commitment from senior management, from governance, that this is a direction that the organization is going in, and that everybody needs to get on that train.
Yeah. And just to play that back, it sounds like at an organizational level, it's really about buy-in for a full change management process around infusing D&I as part of the organization's operations end to end, with your leadership at the top. Like, these are core tenets of change management as a practice within companies. And then at an individual level, I mean, there's always, the could be seen as the easy out as it's a business problem, but it really also, I think, does come down to the individual. And I think that there's a sense where, as a collective, going back to how we started the conversation, that employees are really representative of a tenant of the organization. These are individuals that create a sum of a greater whole. But that if respectful learning and just trying to understand the others, you mentioned some, traditionally taboo work subjects. These are taboo because they're at the core of people's identity. And so they do have an elevated sensitivity. And so I think on a one-to-one level, just staying conscious of that and being open to learning about others, and then taking those insights into account with how you interact on a day-to-day is something anyone can do today. Well, we are at time. So Michael, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspectives with us today. And I would say to anyone who is tuned in and listening, it was a short conversation. And so if there are any questions or commentary you would like to share with us, please feel free to reach out to us at Blackbaud, whether through LinkedIn or via Empower. Thank you so much.